There's a specific moment that happens to people like you. You're explaining what you do for work, and halfway through the second sentence, you watch the other person's face glaze over because you don't have one answer. You're a graphic designer who also codes, writes poetry, teaches yoga on weekends, and you're thinking about starting a podcast on urban planning. And every time someone asks what you're passionate about, you feel that familiar knot in your stomach, because the honest answer is everything and nothing. If you've spent your entire life being told you need to pick one thing, focus, specialize, commit, but every cell in your body resists that advice, what you're about to discover will completely change how you see your career. Because the advice you've been given isn't just wrong, it's designed for a different type of brain, and following it is the exact reason you feel stuck, the trap you've been walking into. Here's what nobody tells you about having multiple talents. The world doesn't just prefer specialists. It's structurally built for them. Every resume template asks for your primary expertise. Every job interview demands you explain your career trajectory as a straight line. Every networking event expects you to deliver a crisp, 7-second elevator pitch that answers one question: what do you do? And if you're someone whose interests span disciplines, whose curiosity refuses to stay in one lane, whose brain lights up at the intersection of unrelated fields, you've learned to see this as a problem. You've apologized for it. You've tried to hide it. You've forced yourself to pick something, stick with it, and ignore the other 90% of what makes you come alive. This is a mistake, not the having of multiple interests. Apologizing for them, because what you're experiencing isn't a lack of focus. What you're experiencing is a cognitive pattern that researchers call high openness to experience, combined with intellectual range. Your brain isn't scattered, it's synthesizing. While a specialist goes deep into one domain, building expertise through repetition and narrow focus, your brain is doing something completely different. It's drawing connections across domains. It's recognizing patterns that only become visible when you step back far enough to see multiple fields simultaneously. What the research actually shows. Let's talk about what science says about people with broad interests. Because the narrative you've been sold, the one that says specialists always win, is based on outdated economic models from the industrial era. Research from organizational psychology shows something very different. In a study tracking career outcomes over 20 years, people with diverse skill sets and cross-domain knowledge didn't just catch up to specialists. In creative fields and complex problem-solving roles, they surpassed them. The reason comes down to something called the lateral thinking advantage. When you've trained your brain in multiple disciplines, you don't just have more knowledge, you have more cognitive tools. A problem that stumps someone with a single framework becomes solvable when you can approach it from 6 different angles. You're not being indecisive when you consider multiple approaches. You're running parallel processing that specialists can't access. Neuroscience backs this up. Brain imaging studies show that people who engage in diverse cognitive activities, switching between different types of thinking, develop stronger connections between distant brain regions. This isn't a distraction. This is your brain building a more integrated neural architecture. The person who only codes develops deep networks in analytical regions, but the person who codes and paints and studies philosophy, their brain builds bridges between analytical, creative, and abstract reasoning centers. They're not doing 3 things poorly. They're building a meta-skill that none of those things alone could create. Why do you keep quitting things you love? Here's the pattern you've probably lived a dozen times. You discover something new. Photography, data science, pottery, whatever it is, it consumes you. For 3 months, maybe 6, you're obsessed. You're learning rapidly, making progress, feeling that rush of competence. And then, just as you're getting good, just as other people start noticing your skill, something shifts. The excitement fades. You start noticing another field, another interest, something else calling for your attention, and you feel the guilt wash over you. Here we go again. Another thing I'm abandoning, another project half-finished, another confirmation that I can't commit to anything. But what if that's not what's happening? What if your brain isn't giving up? What if it's completed the learning cycle it needed and is ready to move on? Research on skill acquisition shows that learning follows a predictable curve: rapid improvement at the beginning, then a plateau, then diminishing returns as you approach mastery. For specialists, that plateau is where the work begins. They push through the boredom, the repetition, the incremental gains, because their goal is maximum depth, But your brain isn't wired to optimize for depth. It's wired to optimize for breadth and synthesis. When you hit that plateau, when you've extracted the core principles of a domain, your brain recognizes that staying longer provides minimal new information. You're not quitting. You're harvesting. You learned what that domain had to teach you. You integrated it into your cognitive framework. And now you're moving on to the next piece of the puzzle. The guilt you feel isn't evidence of a character flaw. It's evidence that you're measuring yourself against the wrong standard. The specialist myth. Let's dismantle the biggest lie you've been told. The myth goes like this. In order to be valuable, you must be the best at one specific thing. You must go so deep into a narrow domain that you become irreplaceable. And on the surface, this makes sense. The world's top cardiac surgeon makes more money than a general practitioner. The elite software engineer at a major tech company outturns someone with general technical skills, but here's what that narrative ignores. Those ultra-specialized roles represent a tiny fraction of the available opportunity. And more importantly, they're increasingly vulnerable. As artificial intelligence and automation advance, the tasks that can be reduced to pure technical execution, no matter how complex, are exactly the tasks that machines will eventually do better than humans. The cardiac surgeon executing a standard procedure is doing pattern recognition and fine motor control. Both things machines are rapidly improving at. What machines can't do, what they won't be able to do for a very long time, is the thing your brain does naturally. Synthesizing knowledge across domains. Recognizing when a solution from one field applies to a problem in another. Building something new at the intersection of disciplines that haven't been combined before. The future doesn't belong to the person who knows one thing better than anyone. It belongs to the person who can connect disparate things in ways no one else has imagined. The hidden advantage you're not using. Here's where this gets practical, because understanding that your brain works differently is only useful if you know how to leverage it. And the mistake most multi-talented people make is trying to do everything simultaneously. They maintain 5 projects, 3 side hustles, 2 potential career paths, all at the same time, and then they wonder why they're exhausted and nothing's moving forward. This is where you need to understand the difference between simultaneous and sequential. Your brain's advantage isn't in doing 5 things at once. It's in doing 5 things over time and integrating the lessons from each into a unique skill stack that no one else has. Think of your career not as a single path, but as a knowledge portfolio. Each interest you pursue, each skill you develop, is an asset. But assets only create value when they're strategically combined. The person who spent 2 years in marketing, then 3 years coding, then started a business teaching creative professionals how to build their own websites. That person isn't scattered. They've built a competitive moat that pure specialists can't cross. The marketer doesn't understand code. The developer doesn't understand marketing. But this person understands both, and they understand the specific pain point that exists at the intersection. That's not a career mistake. That's strategic positioning. What actually works? So if the traditional advice doesn't apply to you, what does? First, you need to stop pathologizing your curiosity. Every time you feel guilty about wanting to explore something new, you're reinforcing the belief that something is wrong with you. There isn't. Your brain is doing exactly what it's designed to do. Collect diverse information and synthesize it into novel combinations. Second, you need a framework for exploration that isn't chaos. This is where most multi-talented people fail. They treat every new interest as equally important, which means nothing gets the sustained attention needed to reach competence. Instead, adopt what researchers call the T-shaped skill model. You go deep enough in 1 or 2 areas to build credibility and generate income. That's the vertical bar of the T, but you maintain broad exploration across multiple domains. That's the horizontal bar. The depth gives you stability. The breadth gives you creativity and adaptability. Third, you need to explicitly design for synthesis. This is the step almost everyone skips. You learn photography, then you learn writing, then you learn data analysis, and you treat them as separate. But the value isn't in having those skills. It's in combining them. The person who can take complex data, visualize it in a compelling way, and write a narrative that makes it meaningful to non-experts. That person has created something more valuable than the sum of the parts. Your job isn't to master each skill independently. It's to find the combinations that create unique value. Fourth, you need to get comfortable with non-linear trajectories. Your career will not look like a ladder. It will look like a web. And that's fine. Actually, it's better than fine. In a world where industries rise and fall in a decade, where the hot skill today is obsolete tomorrow, having multiple nodes in your web means you're anti-fragile. When one area declines, you have others to fall back on. When a new opportunity emerges at the intersection of two fields, you're positioned to see it before specialists in either domain notice. The real question, here's what it comes down to. The question isn't whether you should have multiple interests. That's who you are. The question is whether you're going to keep treating it as a liability or start leveraging it as your core competitive advantage. Because the world is changing faster than it ever has. The career you trained for today might not exist in its current form a decade from now. And in that world, the people who win aren't the ones who went deepest into a single disappearing domain. They're the people who can learn rapidly, adapt quickly, and synthesize knowledge across boundaries. They're the people who, when everyone else is panicking because their specialized skill became obsolete, can look at their knowledge portfolio and find 3 different ways to create value. That's you. That's what your brain has been preparing for this entire time. Not by accident, not because you lack discipline, but because you're wired for a type of success that the old rules don't recognize. You're not making a career mistake by having too many interests. You're making a career mistake by listening to people who only know how to succeed in one way and assuming that's the only way that works. It's not. Stop apologizing for your range. Stop forcing yourself into boxes designed for different brains. And start building a career that actually uses the cognitive architecture you have instead of the one you're supposed to have. The world needs what you can do. I just haven't figured out how to ask for it yet.